Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. Happy holidays. It is now 2 days before Christmas and I thought I would do a video. Actually, I was going to do this as a minute clinic video, but I think there's too much volume to put in here, so this is for Tim. Actually, it's for Tim and Wayne and Billy and Patricia, Nora, my mom, and everybody else that's fighting cancer. So this is a tough one. It took me a while to put this together because I had to research again and refine my knowledge base, but I'll try to translate all the information I got to you guys in a more practical sense. So eating for cancer, what do we have to do? The idea is that if we can live a long and healthy life, that would be great. If we don't live a long and healthy life, then the ideal is that, I hope I go fast so there's no suffering. And I think that's a reasonable idea, but it's also a little selfish because you might be leaving back some folks that are dependent on you and that will continue the suffering. So somebody has to suffer in one way or another, but I think the idea is to get ahead of it. So if we can prevent, not just treat or cure, but if we can prevent, that'd be better. And that's what I want to do is empower you, because I have a lot of specialists that do great jobs in helping the fight. But I think this factory that we have in us is so well built, it's so miraculous that we're really kind of breezing over that aspect of it. We're assuming that when you go to chemotherapy and radiation that the bad cells that you have will die because they're fast reproducing, and the good cells will make it through that toxic load that we get hit with chemotherapy or radiation. So there we say that we have miracles in us that will reproduce and rebuild after damage. But why not get ahead of that and say, even before the cancer starts, live a healthy life? So this is where we'll try to give you a little bit of empowerment. I think empowerment always comes with understanding the basics of science. Because once you have that knowledge base of science, and that's where the data comes in helpful. The data is really great out there. You can find a whole bunch of different videos. I perused a couple different videos, and some of them are helpful. Some of them are downright dangerous and stupid. And I would be very careful about what you follow. And again, research is most important. So let's start this off. So the basic, what causes cancer? This is my son's. I kept this, and he always wonders why I keep this thing. But I think it's a good model of a cell. The cell, if you remember biology, a cell is composed of the nucleus. There's something called endoplasmic reticulum, smooth and rough. Then there's mitochondria, the powerhouses, and lysosomes here and there. And then you have their outer wall. So that's the basics of what happens with a cell, or what a cell is composed of. Now inside this nucleus is a nucleolus. That's where all the chromatin or chromosomes are kept. And these are supposed to be DNA twisted double helix spirals. And that's where your messages that you translate to the next generation are hidden. They're hidden there in the deep depths of this cell for protection. Because they have the most important code to make the species continue, they have to be protected from radiation, chemical agents, mutations. So if you remember this stuff as far as how a cell looks and why the DNA is in the nucleolus, then you'll at least understand how important DNA is. When DNA is not protected, it's exposed. So just think of DNA as being these two fragments. The tail, DNA is just essentially two strips. There's two strips that have messages. They're base pairs. There's 4 of them. Think of amino acids. There's 4 basic amino acids that make up a chain, and it's in sequence, in different sequences for every human being and every animal that's out there. And all animals work the same. Even plants work the same. There's a nucleolus, a nucleus, cells, and stuff like that. There's just a little bit of a different architecture as far as energy between plants and animals. But for all intents and purposes, this is the model that we're going with. So why does cancer happen? Well, the miracle that I talked about earlier is that if you have the messages of DNA in these 2 strands, and the strands are wound together to compress and make it a simple package, and then these are bound together and curled up, and you have this series of repeating amino acids that are chain linked together that are in a little bit of a tiny bundle, and the bundle is protected. It's protected inside this thing. And the cell is protected by other cells around the basic cell that are hunting for bad things. And those are T cells, that's the immune system. But even within the cell itself, even within this nucleus, there's little proteins that come along when this thing is unwound, and all cells have to unwind because they have to reproduce and binary fission, they have to divide. Most cells become senescent. They have a code in them that accounts for cell death or auto death. Now, the idea is that when you reach a certain amount of divisions, usually the telomeres at the top, these little ends, they get shorter and shorter and shorter. Eventually, when there's no more telomere because they've reproduced too many times, then the cell goes through death. It's a programmed cell death. It's supposed to do that to decrease the chances for mutations to occur. So the thing is that's so miraculous is, again, there's T cells that circulate throughout the body in a macroscopic kind of picture, and they look for damage, they look for toxins, they look for parasites and bacteria and viruses, and they destroy. Now, inside the cell itself, in the nucleolus, you actually have these tiny, tiny proteins that kind of act the same way. They go along these lines of DNA strips, and they look for bad code. And if there's a bad code that's found, there's actually a work line that comes in, defines the code, clips it out, another protein clips it out, another one puts the new code back in, and another code glues it together again. It's so impressive what these RNA molecules do, or these RNA things do. This is DNA, and the RNAs are the messengers and the workhorses of the nucleolus. So when it comes time for binary fission to occur or duplication to occur within the nucleus, the DNA separates, and when the DNA separates, it's not all curled up together, so it's exposed. And if it's exposed, it's at risk for damage. So, and it can be, when it's open like this, a simple radiation, simple chemicals, simple pesticides will all come and try to do, simple viruses will try to take advantage of that duplication time. So that's why it's real important for the cell to have its built-in mechanisms. Those little RNA robots that come along and they actually will produce, they make another strand just like this on this side, and make another strand on this side. And then when they're finished, you have this original strand that goes back together again, and you have your two baby strands that form the new DNA. So that's the way it usually works. And again, this is when it's open is when it's vulnerable, and that's when the damage occurs. That's why we use chemotherapy and radiation constantly bombard, because when a cell multiplies, it has to separate, and when it separates, it will be pervious, not impervious, pervious to the damage of chemotherapy and radiation. We just hope that because the cells that are usually cancer cells, they don't have a rate limiting factor. Without getting too detailed, there's a step, as I mentioned before, that usually will say at a certain amount of divisions that the cell's time to die. And it's called the Hayflick limit, but cancer cells don't have that. They don't stop reproducing. They just keep on reproducing very fast. That's why cells usually, cancer cells will be more damaged by radiation and chemotherapy because they're producing very quickly. Just like hair cells and the gut lining, those cells also reproduce very quickly. So you'll see that the hair and the gut will usually be the first to die off after chemotherapy, but they're also the first to come back after chemotherapy. So we just hope that in those very fast reproducing cells, the cancer cells, that they get hit the hardest with the chemotherapy and the radiation, that they die. And we just also hope that the good cells will tolerate their reproducing at a little slower pace, so that they'll be a little bit more bulletproof to the chemotherapy and the radiation. We hope that they will survive. And it's always the biggest problem, is having those cells survive on after the protocol of that you get for the cancer type that you have. So, and surgery too. So that's why I think it's very important to understand, if you know the basics, and that's pretty much the basics. So if you know the basics, then you might understand how things work to support the cells as they're going through either their own reproduction, division, or they're going through the survivorship of chemotherapy and radiation. So how do we make cells stronger? Well, we stay healthier. And that's what we're going to talk about now. And I guess the best thing is to figure out, with all the data that's out there, what is the healthiest way to stay ahead of the game and prevent? Or what's the healthiest way to treat? Or again, what's the healthiest way to cure? So I think there's two realms. There's Western medicine, which is really good with chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. And then there's Eastern medicine, where we try to get good healthy diet, proper social activities, healthy weight, healthy things to do as far as cancer fighting, and that's before the cancer. Now, if you wait until the last minute and the cancer is spread everywhere, the chances of conservative treatment being successful are very low. If you get ahead of it, which is the hardest thing to do, that's why I usually will say for the family members that survive on, or the family members of the person that's afflicted, it's important for you guys to understand what to do, because eventually your time will come when you get at an age where you are susceptible. And we don't want to wait till the last minute upon diagnosis to make the changes. You want to do it ahead of time. And it should be doing it ahead of time too, because usually the lifestyle changes that you do to prevent cancer are also the ones that prevent heart disease and stroke. So the top 3 killers in the United States are going to be heart, cancer, and then stroke or degenerative nerve damage. So it's important to do all this anyway. Now the question is always, if you can't afford it, if you don't feel anything, should you be doing it? And I say yes. So that's what this will hopefully empower you with. So once you understand the genetics and what happens in these the mechanistic data that's out there, then you can kind of apply it to your own life. If it's too hard to understand or grasp that, then just go with the population studies. And population studies have been done. In fact, I always refer to Dan Buettner's work in the blue zones. If you just go backwards in time and figure out, okay, how do people or cultures that live to 100 survive? Those are the blue zones. On a map, if you circle, in Dan Buettner's work, if you circle the areas where people live to 100, and there's 5 of them in his book, if you try to mimic that, then you might be able to get to that point as well. Again, these are population studies, and not as on the evidence basis or evidence hierarchy of studies. These are a little bit on the low side, whereas meta-analyses are on the high side. But still, you want to data gather, so anything that you can do to empower yourself with knowledge will be the most important thing. But it's a good read anyway. So I'd say that we always want to mimic those folks who live the healthiest. So sometimes if you aren't a data gatherer or you're confused with the information, just see what the ages do. See what people who live the longest do and try to reenact that. Now, you usually not find people who live till 100 to be overweight, high stressed, so that's an obvious thing. And the problem is the paradigm has changed, and you might not be able to apply that in a 50 to 60 hour work week with 5 kids and being a CEO of a company, but there's always a way to change. And if you just put in a little at a time, it might be the way you make your lifestyle changes. Don't wait, again, the bottom line is don't wait until it's the last minute and the cancer is spread or you're debilitated and have other diseases on top of it, because it'll be just a little harder to get the ball rolling. So just know about how to take care of your own health. I really think that food is going to be the one variable that we can really manipulate. Genetics are tough, and I've heard some patients say, well, it's in my genes, I have no choice, I'm going to get hit by cancer. That's the difference between nature and nurture. Sometimes when you assume that your genes are going to express themselves, well, hey, go ahead and start smoking, eat as much as you want, don't exercise and do all that stuff. Expose yourself to carcinogens, but that's not the way it really works. The studies have shown that even if it's in your gene pool, if you practice an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, the genes will be repressed, they'll be suppressed instead of being so sometimes when you say have a history of lung cancer, for example, and you smoke, you're asking those genes to be turned on, those genes that your dad or your uncle might have had as far as lung cancer. Now, no question, if you don't smoke, you're doing already a great service to your cells, but living a healthier life is always important. So the idea, again, is to try to, even if it's genetic expression that's in your DNA, there's ways to kind of repress that expression. There's ways to express it excessively fast, and that's what we're going to try to avoid today. So the other thing is to empower your gut. I think that we kind of poo-poo how good the gut is. This is a book by Jason Sonnenberg. Well, Justin Sonnenberg wrote this, but he also had his wife work on it, and it's a great read. I think there's value in treating the gut properly. And that means, again, back to the feeding. If you feed your gut and those little bacteria in your gut properly, high fiber, good mucus, low irritants, then usually those trillion cells, multiple trillion cells in your gut will also work to decrease the inflammatory response. That's more autoimmune, but it's still, I think, if you can maximize on the way the gut works, maximize on avoidance, maximize on healthy lifestyle, then you'll have a higher chance of preventing. So I try to do everything you can. Again, these are all important pointers for fighting heart disease and stroke as well, and autoimmune disease in case you're a Hashimoto's patient, a fibromyalgia patient. All these things can be utilized. That's in the work of Buettner. He found that it was all-cause mortality was decreased with this kind of living. That's not just cancer. I know the topic today is cancer, but all causes of mortality were decreased. If you could do that, in fact, there are some studies that quote in Europe, and I think there's arguments to this, but some studies that will quote that if you just have a healthy lifestyle approach, mostly whole food, plant if you can, and activities, and loving, and very strong social interactions, that will get you to that point, and usually that'll sustain you to the point of fighting the cancers. So again, fine-tuning it and applying it to your own lifestyle is important. So I'd say I divide the fight into those who have cancer, whether it's active surveillance or you're deep into your fight, and the family members of those that are fighting the cancer. I think it's important for a family, a household, a connective sibling and parent and child group to always be together, because it's a tough fight. I've seen my patients go through chemotherapy. I've seen my patients go through hospice. Tough fight for everyone. So again, that is important to have that camaraderie and to have the positive social support. Again, I think mindful eating is important. There's an inborn genetic predisposition to say this alley is dangerous, that spider, even if you haven't seen a spider in your life, that thing looks dangerous, stay away. Now there's a loud lion roar over here. I haven't seen a lion myself, but I know if something roars that loud, I'm going to stay away from it. A train that's coming your way, even if you haven't seen a train before, you know that there's something wrong with that. So I think that the body has its inborn protective mechanism. So if you learn to tap into that and know what your body is saying. If your body is saying, I probably should avoid that, then you probably should listen to your body. If your body's saying, this food is yummy, I'm attracted to this person, I'm attracted to this restaurant, I'm attracted to this kind of food, then you should listen to it and embrace that. But I think even if you're not a scientist or a doctor or have a great group of coaches, there's still a way to kind of utilize the body and its natural instincts to say, maybe I should eat, maybe I shouldn't eat. Should I go to sleep? Should I turn this TV off? I'm tired now, I'm sleepy at the wheel. Listen to your body, that's being mindful. And sometimes being mindful does take a little bit of practice. I learned mine with Deepak Chopra, with Andy Weil, with Herb Benson out of Harvard. I've had the luxury of meeting these folks, these big giants in the medical community, and kind of absorbing my bits and pieces from them. I'm still doing this. Even with patients, I absorb bits and pieces of how success is and what to avoid with those bad outcomes too. So always learning. So the next point is to embrace plants. I think that there's a movement now called the carnivore diet, and I think it works for some people. I would be very careful because I think too much of one thing is the wrong choice. So Terry Walls is a physician who came down with MS, and she's not all plant-based. She just pushes in plants. I think there's a lot of great healing factors that are found in our plant kingdom, and I think a lot of my patients will avoid that. The carnivore guys will definitely avoid that. For whatever reason, if it's working for you, cool, but I think everybody has to change after a while. I wouldn't say, and right now I'm vegan, I don't know if I'll be able to maintain that, but right now I'm going to try to put it in place. I'll see the benefits, I'll measure the benefits, and I'll see if it works for me. I think down the line I might choose something else different. It depends on what my inner heart and my inner gut tell me later on, but the Walls protocol, excellent. She reversed her MS. She was supposed to die a while ago, but she's still living and practicing, and she's a neurosurgeon. So this is a great read. She talks about the 3 cups of vegetables, and it just means packing in those vegetables, fruits, nuts, legumes, seeds, not all in that order, but all that into a healthy diet. And I might be saying the wrong thing. A couple of different things might be wrong, but that's how I think of a plant-based diet. Veggies, fruits, grains, certain grains, nuts and seeds, legumes. I think they're all important. She has her protocol, and you should read the book in case you're interested. For those of you without cancer, just with autoimmune disease, that means rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, all those things, SLE. You might want to read on this. Excellent book. And she breaks it down into very easy steps to get that healthy diet in you. So the next thing would be to avoid the spikes of inflammation. And inflammation is a big buzzword. And supposedly, if you have these things that normally occur, like for example, red blood cell lasts for about 3 months and then it decides to die. And when it signals itself to die, then if the cell is listening and healthy, then another cell replaces it when time comes. The question is, will inflammation interrupt that cycle of senescence or death or reproduction? And yes, it does. Inflammation seems to be the key to driving a lot of disease, and whether it's inflammation in the form of injury, inflammation in the form of anxiety or depression, mental, inflammation in the form of toxins or chemicals, pesticides. EWG.org has the healthy, the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. They're an independent company that rates foods around the U.S. They come up with a new rating scale about every 12 months, 6 to 12 months. It's a free website. It's nice to know if you're limited as far as your budget on what you can spend on. It's nice to know if it's a Dirty Dozen, then you really should spend going organic on that stuff. If it's a Clean 15, you can probably save your money and go conventional. But still, it's important to try to control inflammation as far as those things that go in your body. It's also important to control inflammation as far as gut health. It's also important to control inflammation as far as injury. So inflammation, whether it's those things I just mentioned or something like an insulin spike. There's a lot of the keto camp, or the guys that are practicing ketosis, living in and using the practice of nutrition to get into ketosis. I think it's a great, I have a couple patients that take advantage of that. I think it's helping them properly. It takes a lot of planning. It's usually my aggressive CrossFitters that do that. Kind of was the paleo movement, and it's moved into ketosis, or at least functional ketosis. But there are ways to increase inflammation when you take advantage of sugar, high fructose corn syrup, simple sugars, simple carbohydrates, crappy food. So those things will usually generate a hormone response. They taste good going down, but they also will set off this cascade of metabolic chains that happen that bring up inflammation. And when you bring up inflammation again, because of you splurging, because you weren't listening to your true feelings about the food, you might you might start the whole process of one cell dividing the wrong way, and because it was exposed to that inflammation, and then from that point on it reproduces and produces a bunch of different cells, all cancers, and all because we were misbehaving as far as watching inflammation. So if it is a traumatic thing, then you always take care of that. I had a guy, 20-year-old, 20-something, who about a year and a half ago got into a car accident. He was actually on a motorcycle. Somebody it was a hit and run, hit him, guillotined off one leg, crushed the other leg, and now he's fighting back. He's trying to control his inflammation. He's doing the best he can. He's on a limited budget, but he and his wife have been working within their means to get to that point. The last time I saw him, he's smiling still. Imagine that, a guy that can't walk, that's missing a leg, that doesn't know who did it or who hit him, with all those bills, still smiling. And that, I think, is a success. So that's the first step in decreasing inflammation. The other step is exercise and proper sleep, which we'll talk about in a second. But that just is a example of how some people survive, and they find a way. So even if you're on a low budget, there's always a way to do this properly. So the other thing is fasting, and this was a buzzword, but now it's morphing. There was intermittent fasting, 5-2 fasting. There was timed feeding, but now there's something called the FMD, or fasting mimicking diet. The work of Walter Longo, and I'll talk about this in another tutorial. But the work of Walter Longo had found that when yeast, mice, or now humans are exposed to fasting, there is a chemical reaction that happens in the cell that helps with stimulating autophagy. Autophagy is programmed cell death. And you would think that why would you want the cell to die? And it does, as I mentioned before, it is important that every cell knows when it's supposed to die and get replenished with a new cell. And when the markers and the messages are listened to, then you have a system that continues on. When the markers and the messages are not listened to, that's when you have overgrowth of an abnormal cell, and those are the beginnings of cancer. But what Walter Longo found, and a lot of other fasting, even the ketosis camp has found that this is the same thing too, that there are some things that turn on autophagy in the cell. And we talk about mTOR and PKRAS and a couple of other little messengers that are in the cell that get turned on by fasting, but this is by far the newest information, and it's reproducible. Again, it went from yeast to mice to animals. And what I like about it is that the fasting mimicking diet, at least you don't have to buy that Prolon box of supplement for 5 days, which is a little pricey, but it's if you're hard pressed to kind of put this feeding thing together for the 5 days of the fasting mimicking diet, then you can buy the Prolon thing. I've seen a couple of functional medicine doctors online poo-poo the little box of 5 days of nourishment. But again, I think we're going past the beauty of fasting. If we can find a fasting practice that, number one, helps cells fix and get rid of the riffraff and get rid of the cancer cells, and helps to reproduce the cell in a really pristine way, then why not? And for average people, fasting mimicking diet, which is 5 days only, is suggested like twice a year. And not a big deal, right? For somebody that's deep into cancer, it's sometimes suggested 5 days a month, and it is tough. I'm going through a 10-hour fast. I don't eat from 7 p.m. to 9 a.m. And it's almost 9 a.m. now, so I have my food ready to go. That includes food and tea and or coffee. This is my tea, which I started with, and I said to another patient the other day, I drink about 6 to 10 cups of tea a day. This is about 2 to 3. So, and she was aghast at saying, wow, it's a lot of tea. And compared to caffeine, tea always has less caffeine than coffee. But here's the thing, tea doesn't usually cause reflux. Sometimes high caffeine teas, like the black teas, can cause reflux. But I use the same tea leaves over and over again in the same day. So I usually just put in 2 teaspoons of green tea leaf. I get mine from Adagio. I used to get it at Tivana, sometimes from David's Teas. and I just keep on brewing again and again and again. So I'm not using new tea bundles every time. I'm just taking one and rebrewing it several times. So the concept is that you can knock off the caffeine molecules from your green tea leaves with the first brew and throw that off if you're very hyperstimulated, and just keep on with the polyphenols in the rest of the brews that you have for the next ensuing bunch of brews. I brew that at about 180 degrees. And I don't really get a stimulating effect from it. It just is calming. I usually have just warm water in the morning until it gets to 9 a.m. and then I have everything in a short trunk of 10 hours. So that's 10, 14. It's a type of fast, but the fasting mimicking diet makes it a lot easier, and it's only 5 days. It's a tough 5 days. But if you can get through the 5 days, and the most important thing with the fasting mimicking diet is not just the 5 days, but the refeeding cycle for the next 25 days of the month. 26 on months that are 31 days. But if you just go back to eating McDonald's after doing a fasting mimicking diet, that's not healthy. This is my steak, egg, and cheese bagel. You probably can't see it, but this is my steak, egg, and cheese bagel I used to eat all the time. And this is from 2011, and it's still pretty normal looking, if you can see that through the camera. That's 2011. I have the receipt here. I had one before somewhere, but somebody threw it away when they found it was hard as nails. And these are the 10 packs of sugar that I used to go through with a large McDonald's coffee. I don't like coffee anymore. I'd rather have tea. Sometimes I'll have the coffee if I can't find any tea at a place where I'm at. But I used to eat that all the time, and I had a bunch of different diseases: fibromyalgia, IBS, atrial fibrillation. I had a whole bunch of crap coming my way, and I thought, holy shit, I'm 40 years old, I'm going through all this, and I eventually was pushed to change my diet after a big hit, and I've done that since I was 40. I'm now 56, going on 57, 2019, and I, knock on wood, am going to get to the blue zones. I don't know, we'll see. At least I'll say I tried. So, fasting, a great idea, a great option. Just have to see if it pertains to you and if you can do it. If you can't do it or you can't figure it out, just have to find an author and follow that author. Sometimes alternative medicine is also just as important. This was written by Donald Abrams. He also was a fellow at the Arizona Center of Integrative Medicine, and Andy WAHL. So this talks about, this is integrative oncology. And there's another doctor that does integrative oncology here in Illinois, Evanston. Keith Block. I've taken several patients to his clinic. It's an awesome clinic in Evanston. But there's different things you can also take advantage of. If, God forbid, if you've got the diagnosis of metastasis and you're going to stop your chemo, radiation, or surgery, and just going to get your finances in order, which I hate hearing, but then I'd say you might want to embrace alternative medicine, acupuncture, low-dose naltrexone, medical marijuana. I think they're all beautiful. They're all great things to consider attempting. Even the use of bioidentical hormones are all great things to take advantage of. I wouldn't wait till the last minute. I would throw them in addition to your oncologist if they're willing to work with an integrative practitioner. So a great book. It talks about some of the things I just talked about or mentioned. It's hard to find that. In Keith's book, he doesn't really mention Chinese herbs or acupuncture in depth. He definitely doesn't talk about low-dose naltrexone or medical marijuana, but I like Keith's book because he talks about food. He really harps on food and some of the mechanisms, and a great read as well. And it's also a great, last time I was there at his clinic while I was waiting for my patient to get through her breast cancer evaluation, I was sitting just waiting in the waiting area, and I was actually watching a cooking show. There was a live cooking show. Somebody was giving a demo about how to use foods, and I was there with another lady who had an IV pole. She was probably getting her chemotherapy. And then I was there with a couple that just flew in from O'Hare with their luggage waiting for the consult. So Keith is a great source. So is Donald Abrams if you're on the West Coast. But alternative medicine is great. And I have mentioned about CBD oil in the past. I'll see if I can put links down below. Medical marijuana haven't really spoken about how to use medical marijuana with chemotherapy, but maybe that's the next video. I think I would take advantage of it, and that's in Illinois, that's one of the 40 diseases that are considered positive for getting certified for a medical marijuana card. And I have given medical marijuana cards out to many different patients depending on the disease process, and I've manipulated in microdosing how to use these things to, again, turn off inflammation, turn on healing, get better sleep. So I think it's very important. My baby boomers, when I mention medical marijuana, are very apprehensive because they say they don't want to get high, or they never smoked. And that is totally different because it's microdosing, it's medicinal. I mean, if you just want to get high, that's fine. It's safer than street marijuana, but that's not the idea here. The idea is to use a plant and its sources of food and healing to turn around things. And that'll bring me to Dean Ornish's work. Dean Ornish is a doctor that the information that he had revealed that coronary artery disease is reversible, and it's one of the first guys to come up with that information and show it in small case studies. Now, in that hierarchy I mentioned of evidence-based studies, case studies are at the bottom, but still, you can't ignore case studies when they're so profound. When you see that patients with heart disease showed reversibility within 3 to 5 months of taking on a plant-based diet, low-fat, you can't ignore that. And now he's doing the same thing. It's not just that, it's also group therapy, yoga, exercise, mindful practice, that all combine together to create this idea of how to beat heart disease. And he's applied that same nugget to patients with prostate cancer in situ, that's early prostate cancer, and he's found the same results of turnaround. Reversibility of heart disease, now reversibility of prostate cancer, same thing. Now, this is pretty extreme. Whenever I present this to my patients with heart disease now or early cancer, it's like, why, I can't be a vegan, because his is mostly just low fat and all vegetable or all plant. And that's a tough adaptation. If you're going from standard American diet to here, you'll need some help. That's why it's important to have a coaching team. You have to have somebody kind of get you there in steps. To go cold turkey, usually only the few and the proud will get to that point of success. Just because if your taste buds, if your mouth, if your brain, if your fat cells are all used to having a standard American diet, and you then give them those same cells plant-based eating, low fat, it's going to be a rough couple of weeks to months. So if you have a coaching staff that's with you, nutritionist, an integrative medicine doctor, a psychologist, or a counselor, somebody of a personal trainer to help you through the activities, an acupuncturist. If you have all those guys that are on your coaching team, you'll have a higher success rate, which is why I like to reach out for those folks. So it is important to embrace plant-based dieting. If you're not, again, you can go with the WAHL protocol. I was watching a cooking show the other day where she was being interviewed, and she had the dish that she was making was a fish, but she was talking about eating nose to tail, because we always just get the meat, and because the meat is easy to cook, you don't like bones and all that other stuff. But in the Philippines, we have a lot of dishes that include, well, not a lot, but there are dishes that include fish heads. And it's like, ooh, fish heads, eating the eyes, eating the brains, eating the fat behind the jaws. Well, fat behind the jaws is yummy, especially with Chilean sea bass. The meat is great, but most people don't like eating the head because it reminds them that they just killed something. And I'm not an animal activist, but I think it is important to take advantage of the nutrients that are found in the entire animal. And it's going to be difficult if you're eating a cow, but it'll be a lot easier when you're eating fish, maybe chicken. Again, you have to source this properly and make sure you don't have as many pesticides or growth hormones in those animals. But it's a lot easier when you take advantage of plants, because if you eat a wide plethora of different colored plants every single day, then you'll take in all those cancer fighting, because the plants want to fight cancer too. Can't take away all those cancer fighting phytochemicals and put them into your gut. And the gut, when it's assimilated properly and absorbed, then you have a good chance of having, that's natural chemotherapy. So why not take advantage of that? So again, it's important to try to take advantage of getting into a direction. You don't have to leap off the cliff, but at least you'll know that the information's there and read into it and see some nice pictures and pick up some ideas. You don't have to go full heads deep into the vegetarian or vegan lifestyle. You can go a little easier with the WAHL protocol. You can kind of research and see. Sometimes if you're just in the preventive phase, I think keto seems to be a fast response. So keto practice, for the folks that are practicing keto, it works to decrease markers of inflammation. The question is going to be whether it actually, there's no studies yet, but whether it actually goes on to reverse disease. It reverses markers of inflammation, and you can extrapolate that if you decrease all the markers of inflammation, you'll eventually beat the disease process, but it has yet to be seen. I'm pretty confident you're going to see some positive results with ketoing, but that too, a lot of the folks who practice keto, especially online, they seem to be very obsessive compulsive, which is fine. I think you have to, whether you choose keto or vegetarian or a fasting diet, you always have to be planning and being mindful about eating. So it's not just you're hungry, you stop over wherever you are and get into fast food. That's the standard American diet, standard American activity, and that's what's led us into this disease-heavy millennial problem that we have. The diseases of the millennium are just so multifactorial. In addition to cancer, you have heart disease and autoimmune disease and low T or menopause. There's a lot of crap going on, and it's not just one thing, it's multitudes of different things all at the same time. And they seem to blossom when my guys turn 40 and 50. So you got to be careful. If you wait till the last minute and you don't feel anything, so you're not going to invest, it can be much harder to take care of. Whether you have one disease and it's magnificent and it's everywhere, or you have 10 different diseases all at the same time, low burning fires, it's still a huge fire. Either way, it's going to be, if you get ahead of that and prepare for it, knowing what your family members have gone through, knowing what your community has gone through, knowing what the standard American has gone through, then you can get in front of it and be the one that survives. So the last thing is the social aspect, and that's where Dean Ornish, his data showed telomere. I mentioned about telomeres in the beginning as far as the little end caps to the DNA, and the DNA again is the message that translates out and makes the species survive. He actually found that telomeres lengthen when you practice his lifestyle change. And hopefully you'll be able to see that too with the guys that are doing keto. Since keto is such a big rush now, I think you're going to see a lot of data gathering in the next 5 to 10 years. And with the data comes reproducibility. With reproducibility, you can apply it to your own. You can figure out with distinct direction which practice to take on and how fast to do it. So again, telomeres, calming practice always helps. Nature therapy, that's why I'm dressed this way. I'm gonna be going out and doing, it's Saturday. I'm gonna be out and doing a little bit of a hike. I think nature and that seems to resonate with me. I wouldn't have done that before. I hated going out in the woods. I hated being with insects, but now I listen to what I want or what my body's asking me, and I get out at least once a week. So I think it's a great thing to be mindful of what your body needs, to take advantage of the wisdom of nature, take advantage of the wisdom of the ages, and then put it into practice. Don't wait till the last minute. So it is important to have a coaching team. I mentioned the folks that I like. It is important to read. I think reading is, you can go to half-price books or go to Amazon and get some used ones. Hardbacks are always the best because they last longest. I have an accumulation of different books. I think some patients have taken my books. I try not to lend them out because I use them as reference. But I will share my interpretations as best as possible on video. It does take more, to live the standard American diet is cheap. To live different than standard American diet, you're going to have to invest money. But the money that you invest will be less money if you do it properly than what you're going to pay later on with co-pays and medical procedures and expensive medicines. So if we can use nature's pharmacy first and take advantage of this factory and fine-tune the factory so it's working properly, you won't need to see the doctor. I love when I tell patients, I'll see you in a year. That's so awesome versus 3 months or 6 months after your blood test. When I say 1 to 2 years, I'm getting to the point where a couple patients, it's a little I'm a little bit scared of doing it, but I'll tell them, if you're doing everything properly, I'll see you in 2 years. But I work for a company we have to follow a medical paradigm, and it has to be every year. So, and most people usually have an event that comes up sometime, and it knocks them off their path, and that's when I always like to say, let's problem solve this and get you back on to healthy lifestyle. So sleep is also very important. I think we poo-poo sleep, and most of us will say that this is a great video, not a video, but an audio, and it helps you get through the calming practice, or develop a calming practice for sleep. I think in college we have learned to get by with very little sleep as possible, but you usually find the best athletes and some of the best brains in the world have embraced sleep properly. Now Einstein supposedly didn't sleep, and I don't think Steve Jobs did either, but that's not the paradigm. I think the average American should be sleeping properly at least 8 hours. There's some people that fall above and below that curve, but I think you should still shoot for refreshing sleep. And there's ways to check that. I check DHEA levels, cortisol levels, testosterone levels, hormone levels, but there's ways to do that. Sometimes Fitbits can tell you if you moved a lot, but a true sleep study will tell you whether you're getting deep sleep. So it is important. So whether it's days or years, you really, and that's the thing nowadays with my patient Tim, he was found to have prostate cancer with a couple biopsies, most recently. And with prostate cancer, nowadays, because everybody was cutting and burning and doing massive radical surgery about 10 years ago, but the outcome was the same. The patients that went through radical surgery and the patients that chose not to go through radical surgery were surviving the same length of time. So it didn't really make a difference. So now we're finding that in the prostate cancer, as long as the biopsies come back and it's not aggressive, usually they'll do active surveillance. Active surveillance just means we'll just watch you. But don't take that as thank God, it's just going to watch me. I would say at that point in time, you make all these changes. So Tim, hopefully you're watching this, but try to instill or try to inject these changes into your lifestyle, because usually with active surveillance, I don't think there's a small percentage of guys with active surveillance in prostate cancer that reverse it. There's a large percentage of guys that just keep on with the same score, and it stays in the capsule. But there's also a subset of those folks who go on to metastasis, and that's when you go through radical prostatectomy. But if it were me, again, with Dean Orange's work, I would try to embrace something different than before while you're going through the surveillance every year or every 6 months. Even if you're a cancer survivor, I say these pointers all pertain to you guys. Cancer surviving just means we haven't really taken a big dent out of cancer. We know with Jerry Lewis doing those telethons and the attempts of the promotions to end cancer, find a cure for cancer, I don't think we've really taken a dent out of cancer, truthfully. Breast cancer, we're doing a lot of things to find it early, but I think overall cancer is still number 2 on the death list of most Americans. And here's the thing, if you look at the blue zones, early death in America comes from those 3 things I mentioned, heart disease, cancer, and degenerative diseases of the brain or stroke. When you look at those blue zones, they die of the same thing, but they die at 100 instead of 70. So if we just practice what they do, we'll still have the same diseases, but it'll just be at the age of 100. And I think that's, if we can live to that point without being stuck in a nursing home or on a wheelchair or in a bed or on an IV pole, I think then you can contribute back to your great-great-grandkids and have them see how you lived. And then, again, you can pass on that healing knowledge to the next generation or the future generation. So I think it's important to try to do as best as you can, even if you are a survivor, because theoretically the next step with watching you is to see when it comes back, or when you get hit with chemotherapy, radiation. That also changes other cells so that they can potentially morph into leukemia or other things. So you still got to be doing the right thing. So I think that's about it. Hopefully, Tim, this does help, and all the other folks that are on the fence with regards to what to do. This hopefully will give you some semblance of a direction of some sort. The one thing, even if you're, unfortunately, if you only have a couple of days to weeks, which is what they gave my mom, 2009, December 23rd, she was told pancreatic cancer with metastasis to the liver. And that was after her coming back from a trip to Hawaii where she was in the pool swimming and enjoying the beach. And I remember this distinctly when she was given that diagnosis of the big C. When she was given the diagnosis, it went downhill quickly. But it went downhill quickly, I believe, because she threw in the towel. And you know, everybody's a little different, but as doctors, we're supposed to tell the truth. And I think there's a problem with doctors just laying the truth out and saying, get your finances in order. I think that we are obligated to tell our patients the truth. Siddhartha Mukherjee put together a book called Emperor of All Maladies, and there's a saying that he had in the book that doctors mistake the problem, I'm paraphrasing this now, the problem of telling the truth with taking away hope, and I think those two things are totally different. You can give the patient the diagnosis, but we should not take away hope from that patient or that family member. So I think it's important for us as doctors to convey what the diagnosis is, but also to plan. And it's not just planning paying your bills and getting your life insurance and saying goodbye to all your classmates from high school. It's planning on living one day at a time as healthy a disease as possible. Life over cancer, with what Keith Block had written, is important when you can get over the cancer. And you'll always hear, well, you won't always hear, but you occasionally will hear these miracles. And the miracles, when they happen, are usually termed a misdiagnosis. When a cancer goes away on a CT scan or an MRI, it's a misdiagnosis. You never had that cancer, it was something else. And we say that it's very few, but I think it could be actually very many people. But again, when we use statistics, we're supposed to use statistics to give a patient direction. And sometimes there's something called the ecological fallacy when we say, oh, you have pancreatic cancer, like in the case of my mom. She passed away Valentine's Day. She was given diagnosis on December 23rd. She passed away in February on Valentine's Day. That was quick, but I think half of it was, well, I don't want to go into what caused it, but when your hope is taken away from you, then you don't want to eat, you don't want to exercise. It's like, what am I doing that for? I don't want to pray. And suddenly the body just starts to go into depression, and that plays a big role in the fight. So I think that we have to go outside the box, and you can be the small percentage. You don't have to put everybody that has a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, no matter how bad it's staged, into, well, you're not going to survive this one, is not fair. So that's where we take the ecological fallacy and we say that you don't have to be a statistics. You can be actually the one who survives. So plan to live like the one who survives and try your best. If your doctor doesn't do it, get a new doctor. So hopefully this gives you guys some options and gives you a little bit of direction. If you have any great books that you might want to share, put them on the comments down below. Otherwise, I will see you at the next tutorial, and click on my subscribe button if you want to learn about some of the things I talk about in the Minute Clinic or my future tutorials.